The arena was electric. Thousands of voices roared beneath the hot white lights. A reigning champion stood in the center of the ring, undefeated, unstoppable, untouchable. He had crushed contenders. He had silenced critics. He believed there was no one alive who could humble him. And then he pointed into the crowd. He saw a quiet man, calm, still, watching. A random face in a sea of noise. "You!" the champion shouted. "You think you can do better?" The crowd laughed. The quiet man didn't. Seconds later, the laughter died, because the random man slowly stood up, and the champion's confidence drained from his face. He hadn't challenged a nobody. He had challenged Bruce Lee. And what happened next became one of the most unforgettable moments in martial arts history. Before we step into this story, do this. If you believe confidence without awareness is dangerous, subscribe now. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever underestimated someone and paid the price? Now let me take you inside the arena that night. The city had been waiting weeks for this night. Posters covered brick walls. Radio hosts wouldn't stop talking about it. Sports writers called it a guaranteed spectacle. The reigning champion Victor the Titan Hale was defending his title yet again. 12 consecutive victories, 8 by knockout, 4 by submission. Zero doubts in his mind. Victor wasn't just skilled. He was theatrical. He loved dominance. He loved humiliation. He fed off energy. He thrived on proving superiority. Backstage, he shadowboxed in front of a mirror. Sweat glistened across his shoulders. His trainer rapped his fists while giving routine instructions, but Victor barely listened. He had already visualized the finish. Third round knockout, the crowd chanting his name. Another headline secured. "Focus," his trainer muttered. Victor smirked. "I am focused on winning." The arena thundered as his name echoed through speakers. He stepped through the curtain into blinding light. Arms raised, chin high, confidence radiating from every movement. Across the ring stood his opponent, a respectable fighter, but already mentally defeated. You could see it in his posture. The slight hesitation, the swallowed breath. Victor saw it too. He grinned. The bell rang. The first round wasn't even competitive. Victor toyed with him. A jab, a step back, a spinning kick that barely missed but sent a message. The crowd roared with every flashy strike. Victor wasn't just fighting, he was performing. Midway through the second round, he dropped his opponent with a clean right hook. The man struggled up, pride barely holding him upright. The referee allowed it to continue. Victor circled him like a predator, but something strange happened. From the third row, just off center, sat a man who didn't react like everyone else. He wasn't cheering. He wasn't flinching. He wasn't impressed. He watched, still, calm, analytical. Victor noticed him during a clinch. Their eyes met for half a second. There was no fear there, just observation. It irritated him. By the end of the second round, Victor had full control. The fight was essentially over. The crowd knew it. His opponent knew it. Even the commentators were discussing the next challenger. And that's when Victor did something impulsive. Between rounds, instead of returning immediately to his corner, he turned toward the audience. He paced along the ropes. "You're bored!" he shouted into the microphone that had been handed to him by an overexcited announcer. "You want something real?" The crowd roared louder. Victor's ego expanded with the noise. He pointed randomly into the stands until his finger froze. It landed on the calm man. "You," Victor yelled. "You've been staring all night. Think you can do better?" The section burst into laughter. Security shifted nervously. The man didn't respond. Victor leaned over the ropes. "Come on! Or are you just another critic?" Still no reaction. The audience began chanting. "Let him try! Let him try!" Victor fed off it. "Bring him down," he ordered, half joking, half serious. Security hesitated, but the crowd pressure was overwhelming. The moment had taken on a life of its own. What started as arrogance was turning into spectacle. The man finally stood. He wasn't large, not towering, not bulky, lean, balanced, effortless posture. He removed his jacket calmly, folding it over his seat. The arena noise shifted. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was curiosity. Victor smirked. "This'll be quick." The man walked down the steps with measured calm. No rush. No anger. No prideful gestures. Just composure. Up close, something felt different. Victor felt it but ignored it. When the man stepped through the ropes, the atmosphere changed completely. The referee tried to intervene. "This isn't sanctioned," Victor waved him off. "Relax." Exhibition. The crowd buzzed with nervous excitement. Victor circled casually. "What's your name?" The man looked at him quietly for a moment. Then, in a calm, steady voice, he answered, "Bruce." A ripple moved through the arena. Victor laughed. "Bruce? That's it?" The man nodded. "Bruce Lee." The name traveled like electricity. At first, only a few people reacted. Then more. Then entire sections began whispering. Recognition dawned. Faces changed. Victor's smirk faded slightly. He searched the man's face more carefully now. Sharp eyes, focused, alive with awareness. This wasn't random. This was intentional calm. Victor tried to recover his swagger. "All right, Bruce. Show me what you've got." Bruce Lee settled into a stance so fluid it almost didn't look like a stance at all. His weight balanced. His shoulders relaxed. His gaze unwavering. No theatrics. No showmanship. Just presence. Victor threw the first strike, a fast jab meant to test distance. Bruce wasn't there. He hadn't stepped back dramatically. He hadn't lunged. He simply wasn't where the punch landed. Victor blinked. The crowd murmured. Victor tried again. A quick combination this time. Bruce deflected with minimal movement. Economy. Precision. No wasted energy. Victor felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. He increased speed. Bruce matched it. Not with aggression but with control. Every motion from Bruce was deliberate, measured, almost effortless. Victor's breathing began to change. Bruce's didn't. Then it happened. Victor lunged forward with a powerful right hooked same strike that had ended countless fights. Bruce stepped inside it. Inside. Before Victor could retract his arm, a sharp, controlled strike landed against his chestnut, crushing, not theatrical, just perfectly placed. Victor stumbled backward. The crowd gasped. It wasn't the force. It was the timing. Victor stared at him. For the first time in years, he felt studied, exposed. Bruce didn't taunt. He didn't smile. He simply waited. Victor attacked again, this time fueled by pride rather than strategy. A flurry of kicks and punches meant to overwhelm. Bruce moved like water, slipping, redirecting, neutralizing. Then, in one seamless motion, Bruce delivered a lightning-fast combination so fast many in the audience didn't even see it clearly. Victor dropped to one knee. Silence flooded the arena. Not dramatic silence, stunned silence. Victor looked up from the canvas. The lights above seemed harsher now. Bruce stood calmly a few feet away, not gloating, not celebrating, just breathing steadily. Victor realized something profound in that moment. Power without awareness is fragile. Confidence without humility is dangerous. He had challenged someone he didn't understand. He had mistaken quiet for weakness. He had mistaken stillness for fear. Bruce stepped closer and extended a hand. Victor hesitated. Then he took it. Bruce helped him to his feet, not as a victor humiliating a loser but as a teacher lifting a student. Into the microphone, Bruce spoke softly, but the arena was so silent that every word carried. "True strength," he said, "does not announce itself." The words struck harder than any punch. Victor swallowed his pride and nodded. The crowd erupted, not in mockery but in respect, because they had just witnessed something rare, not a fight, a lesson. Victor turned toward the audience again, but this time his posture had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by reflection. He looked at Bruce. "Thank you," he said quietly. Bruce simply nodded once, retrieved his jacket, and walked back toward the stands as calmly as he had entered. No celebration, no extended spotlight, just quiet departure. But the energy in that arena would never be the same again, and neither would Victor Hale. Because sometimes the loudest moment of your life comes from the quietest man in the room. The arena did not empty quickly that night. People lingered in the aisles. Conversations overlapped. Phones buzzed with frantic messages. Commentators replayed the moment again and again, trying to explain what had just happened. But inside the locker room there was no noise. Victor Hale sat alone on a wooden bench, elbows on his knees, hands hanging loosely between them. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly. His gloves lay on the floor like shed skin. He wasn't injured, not physically. His ribs ached slightly where the precise strike had landed, but it wasn't pain that kept him still. It was realization. He replayed the exchange in his mind, jab that met empty air, the effortless deflection, the way Bruce had stepped inside his power as if stepping through an open doorway. Victor had fought monsters before, heavy hitters, technical geniuses, dirty fighters, strategists. But this was different. This wasn't domination. It was understanding. There had been no anger in Bruce's movements, no urgency, no need to prove anything, just clarity. A knock came at the locker room door. Victor didn't answer. The door opened slightly and his trainer stepped inside. Marcus had been with Victor since the early amateur days, through broken noses, through local tournaments and half-empty gyms, through the first major contract. Marcus didn't speak immediately. He just leaned against the wall. "You all right?" he finally asked. Victor nodded slowly. "Yeah." Marcus studied him. "You're not mad." Victor shook his head. "I should be," he said quietly. "But I may not." He looked down at his hands. "I've never felt that before." Marcus understood. Outclassed? Victor exhaled through his nose. Seen. The word lingered. He stood up and walked toward the small sink in the corner. Cold water splashed against his face. He stared into the mirror. For years that reflection had been fuel, confidence, certainty. Tonight it looked different. Not weaker. Just aware. A staff member knocked again, more urgently this time. "Victor, there's someone asking to see you." Victor didn't need to ask who. "Let him in." A few moments later, Bruce Lee stepped into the room, jacket draped over his arm. He carried no entourage, no security, no manager, just himself. Up close, in the harsh locker room light, Bruce looked even more unassuming. Lean frame, calm expression, eyes that seemed to observe everything without judgment. Marcus straightened up instinctively. Victor stepped forward. There was an awkward Pausetwo warriors standing in silence, neither needing to assert anything. "I owe you an apology," Victor said first. Bruce tilted his head slightly. "For what?" "For turning it into a spectacle." Bruce's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but close. Spectacles reveal truth. Victor let out a short breath that almost resembled a laugh. "You didn't have to step in there. You invited me." "That wasn't serious." Bruce's eyes sharpened gently. "You were serious." Victor couldn't argue with that. He had meant it. His ego had meant it. Bruce set his jacket down on a chair and stepped closer. "Tell me something," he said calmly. "Why did you point at me?" Victor hesitated. "Because you weren't reacting. And that bothered you?" "Yes." Bruce nodded. "Why?" Victor searched for the answer and realized it wasn't simple. "Because everyone reacts," he said slowly. "They cheer. They flinch. They show something. You didn't." Bruce folded his arms loosely. "You rely on reaction." It wasn't an accusation. It was observation. Victor swallowed. "I feed off it." Bruce stepped toward the center of the room. "When your strength depends on others responding, it is not entirely yours." The words landed heavier than any strike earlier. Marcus shifted, sensing this wasn't just conversation, it was instruction. Victor leaned back against a locker. "So what is strength, then?" Bruce didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved. No warning. No dramatic wind-up. He stepped forward with a blur of speed, stopping his fist less than an inch from Victor's chest. The air moved sharply against fabric. Victor didn't even see the motion begin. Bruce lowered his hand gently. "Control," he said. "Not power, not applause. Control." Victor felt a strange mixture of admiration and discomfort. "You could have knocked me out." Bruce shrugged slightly. "Perhaps. Why didn't you?" Bruce's gaze softened, almost human in a way that transcended technique. "Because you are not my enemy." Silence filled the room again. Victor realized something important in that moment. Bruce hadn't stepped into the ring to humiliate him. He had stepped in to demonstrate something. A lesson delivered through experience rather than lecture. Marcus finally spoke. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Bruce smiled faintly. "Movement is expression. It is not learned the way you memorize steps. It is discovered." Victor frowned slightly. "Discovered how?" "By removing what is unnecessary." Victor thought about his own style of flashy spins, exaggerated setups, crowd-pleasing gestures. Bruce continued, "When you fight the opponent and the audience. That is two battles." Victor felt exposed, agony, but not attacked. Bruce walked toward the door, then paused. "If you wish," he said, "come train tomorrow morning." Victor blinked. "Train?" Bruce nodded once. "At dawn." He gave an address. No grand speech. No motivational finale. And then he left. The locker room felt smaller after he exited. Marcus looked at Victor. "You going?" Victor didn't hesitate. "Yes." Dawn in the city was quiet. The address led to a modest training space tucked between storefronts. No massive banners. No flashing lights. Just a simple sign and a clean wooden floor inside. Victor arrived early. Bruce was already there. Stretching. Breathing. Alone. Victor stepped in, closing the door behind him. The room smelled faintly of wood and Swethenist work. Bruce glanced up briefly. "You came. You expected I wouldn't?" Bruce returned to his stretch. "Expectation limits awareness." Victor almost smiled. They began without ceremony. No cameras, no audience, no cheering. Bruce motioned for Victor to attack. Victor did carefully this time. He moved with intention, stripping away unnecessary flair, but still Bruce intercepted, redirected, neutralized, again and again. Each time Bruce explained it not with long speeches, but with small corrections. You telegraph here. Your shoulder tightens before impact. You seek dominance instead of efficiency. Victor's frustration rose at first, but it was different from ego-driven anger. It was the frustration of realizing how much he didn't know. Hours passed. Sweat pooled on the floor. Victor's muscles burned. Bruce barely seemed winded. At one point, Victor dropped to the mat, breathing heavily. "How are you not tired?" he asked between breaths. Bruce knelt across from him. "I am tired," he said calmly, "but I do not waste energy." Victor stared at the ceiling. "I've built my whole career on overpowering people, and you have succeeded," Bruce acknowledged. But Bruce's eyes held steady. But power fades, speed slows, applause shifts. Victor sat up slowly. "What doesn't fade?" Bruce placed a hand lightly against his own chest. "Understanding." The word echoed in Victor's mind. Understanding of distance, timing, emotion, self. They resumed, this time slower. Bruce guided him through subtle movie mencho to stand without tension, how to step without noise, how to strike without announcing intention. Victor felt awkward at first, like a beginner, and that humbled him more than any knockout could. At one point, Bruce stopped him mid-motion. "You are thinking of winning," Bruce said. Victor blinked. "Of course I am." Bruce shook his head gently. "Then you are not present." Victor felt the truth of that statement settle deeply. His entire career had been future-focused. The next title, the next headline, the next opponent. He had rarely been fully inside the moment itself. Bruce demonstrated a simple movie meant just, a shift of weight, and a direct, explosive strike that stopped inches from Victor's face. "Do not think of winning," Bruce said softly. "Think of expressing." Victor stood still. Expressing. Not proving. Not dominating. Expressing. They trained until sunlight poured through the windows in golden beams. Finally, Bruce stepped back. "That is enough for today." Victor wiped sweat from his brow. "I feel like I lost again." Bruce shook his head. "You began." Victor let out a slow breath. "Why help me?" he asked honestly. Bruce picked up his jacket. "Because you asked without asking." Victor frowned slightly. "You came this morning," Bruce clarified. "That is asking." Victor nodded slowly. As Bruce walked toward the door, Victor felt something shift inside him, not just in his fighting style, but in his identity. He wasn't leaving as a dethroned champion. He was leaving as a student. And for the first time in years, that felt stronger than being undefeated. Outside, the city buzzed awake. Traffic hummed. Shops opened. Life moved forward. Victor stood on the sidewalk, breathing deeply. The world looked the same, but he wasn't. The arrogance that once felt like armor now seemed heavy. He didn't resent what happened in the arena. He was grateful, because sometimes humiliation is simply transformation disguised as embarrassment. And sometimes the greatest opponent you face is the version of yourself that believes it already knows everything. Victor turned and walked down the street, not toward interviews or cameras but toward quiet reflection. The champion who had once needed the crowd's roar now sought something different. Stillness, control, understanding. And somewhere, in a modest training room behind him, Bruce Lee continued moving, not for applause, not for headlines, but for mastery. And that difference changed everything. The weeks that followed did not make headlines. There were no viral clips of early morning training sessions, no interviews about transformation, no dramatic press conferences announcing a reinvention. On the surface, Victor Hale was still the reigning champion, but internally everything had shifted. He returned to Bruce's training space again, and agonizame times at dawn, sometimes late at night after the city quieted. The sessions were never flashy. They were rarely loud. Often they began in silence. Victor learned to stand before he learned to strike again. Bruce would have him balance on the balls of his feet for minutes at a time, adjusting posture by millimeters. He would lightly tap Victor's shoulder, and if Victor swayed even slightly off-center, Bruce would shake his head. Rooted, Bruce would say, but not rigid. Victor began noticing how much tension he carried, not just in his muscles, but in his mind. He clenched his jaw unconsciously. His shoulders rose when he anticipated impact. His breathing shortened when he imagined being countered. "You fight the future," Bruce observed one morning. Victor paused mid-step. "What does that mean?" "You brace for what hasn't happened yet." Victor thought about that long after training ended. He realized most of his life had been bracing. Bracing for critics, bracing for failure, bracing for losing status. His arrogance hadn't been pure ego, it had been defense, a shield built from dominance. One afternoon, while they rested between drills, Victor asked the question that had lingered in his mind since the arena. "Did you know who I was that night?" Bruce gave a small nod. "Yes." Victor exhaled softly. "So you weren't just a random spectator." Bruce's eyes warmed slightly. "No one is random." Victor almost smiled. "Why didn't you say something when I called you out?" Bruce leaned back against the wall. "Would you have listened?" The honesty of that question struck deeply. Victor shook his head slowly. "No," he admitted. Bruce's gaze held no judgment. Then experience was the better teacher. There was no resentment in Victor any more only gratitude. As the date of his next title defense approached, reporters began circling again. They wanted statements about the incident. They wanted controversy. They wanted tension. Victor surprised them. At a press conference under bright lights and eager microphones, he spoke calmly. "I underestimated someone," he said, "and I learned from it." The room buzzed with confusion. They expected denial, excuses, dismissal. Instead, he continued, "True strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. I forgot that. Some journalists tried to push him. Are you saying Bruce Lee is better than you?" Victor didn't hesitate. "I'm saying he showed me how much more there is to learn." That humility rippled outward. Some fans called it weakness. Others called it growth. Victor didn't engage in debates. He no longer felt the need to defend his image. The night of his next fight arrived quietly compared to the spectacle weeks before. The arena was still full, but the energy felt different. Victor stood in the locker room again, gloves resting on his hands. Marcus looked at him carefully. "You're calmer," Marcus said. Victor nodded. "I'm not here to prove anything." Marcus smirked slightly. "That's new." Victor smiled faintly. "I'm here to express." When he stepped into the arena this time, he didn't soak in the applause the way he once had. He acknowledged it but didn't feed on it. His opponent was strong, hungry, determined to make a name. The bell rang. Victor moved differently. Gone were the exaggerated feints meant to entertain. Gone were the unnecessary spins designed to provoke cheers. His strikes were direct, efficient, precise. He felt space instead of forcing it. He listened with his eyes. In the second round, his opponent launched an aggressive combination. The old Victor might have countered with equal aggression. This time he stepped just slightly offline, redirected, controlled, and delivered a clean, decisive strike that ended the exchange without chaos. The crowd roared, but Victor barely heard it. He wasn't lost in noise. He was inside the moment. By the third round, it was clear who commanded the rhythm of the fight, not through intimidation, through understanding. When the final bell rang, Victor stood victorious once more. But the feeling was completely different. There was no surge of ego, no internal shouting of superiority, just quiet satisfaction. He bowed slightly toward his opponent before the referee raised his hand, a gesture of respect. Later that night, instead of celebrating wildly, Victor went somewhere unexpected, back to the modest training space. The lights were off inside. He sat on the front steps alone, breathing in the cool night air. After a few minutes, the door opened softly behind him. Bruce stepped out. "You fought well," Bruce said. Victor didn't turn immediately. "I felt present." Bruce sat beside him on the steps. "That is victory," he replied. Victor looked down at his hands. "I used to think losing in front of everyone would destroy me." Bruce remained silent, allowing him to continue. "But that night," Victor said quietly, "was the best thing that ever happened to me." Bruce studied him for a long moment. "Pain can be sharpening," he said softly, "or it can be breaking. The difference is choice." Victor nodded. "I almost chose breaking, but you did not." They sat in silence again. City lights flickered in the distance. A siren wailed far away. The world continued as always. Victor turned slightly toward Bruce. "Do you ever stop learning?" he asked. Bruce smiled faintly. "When you stop learning, you begin fading." Victor absorbed that. He realized mastery wasn't a destination. It wasn't a belt or a record or applause. It was a continuous refinement of self. Weeks turned into months. Victor's style evolved further. Commentators began noticing subtle differences. He's more controlled now. He's conserving energy. He's reading opponents differently. They speculated about secret training camps and new techniques. They didn't understand that the greatest shift had been internal. Victor no longer entered arenas to dominate crowds. He entered to test understanding. One evening after an intense session, Victor lingered as Bruce wiped down the training floor. "There's something I never asked," Victor said. Bruce looked up. "Why were you in the arena that night?" Bruce paused for a brief second. To observe, he answered simply. Victor tilted his head. "Me?" Bruce nodded. "I had heard of you." Victor felt a strange humility wash over him. "You were studying me?" "I study everyone," Bruce replied. "Every fighter reveals themselves." Victor smiled lightly. "And what did I reveal?" Bruce met his gaze evenly. "Hunger, talent, and fear." Victor didn't flinch this time. He understood. "I was afraid of being ordinary," he admitted. Bruce's expression softened. "And now?" Victor considered the question carefully. "Now I'm more afraid of never improving." Bruce nodded once, approving. "That fear is useful." As time passed, their relationship shifted subtly. Student and teacher became something closer to equals in conversation, though Victor always knew the depth of Bruce's mastery ran far beyond his own. One afternoon, a young amateur fighter visited the gym, wide-eyed and brimming with confidence. He challenged Victor playfully during drills, mimicking the same bold energy Victor once carried. Victor saw himself in that young man. After sparring gently and correcting him patiently, Victor pulled him aside. "Don't mistake quiet for weakness," he said. The young fighter frowned slightly. Victor smiled. "Trust me." Later that evening, Bruce observed Victor from across the room. "You have changed," Bruce said. Victor wiped sweat from his brow. "I was forced to." Bruce shook his head gently. "No, you chose to." Victor looked around the modest, spaceth wooden floor, the scuffed walls, the simplicity of it all. It struck him how different this environment was from the grand arenas he once worshipped. Here, there were no lights, no chants, no performance, only truth, and truth had reshaped him more than any trophy ever could. Years later, fans would still talk about the night a champion pointed into the crowd and unknowingly called out Bruce Lee. They would exaggerate details, embellish moments, turn it into legend. But Victor knew the real story wasn't about a public challenge. It was about a private awakening. He hadn't just realized he was facing Bruce Lee. He had realized he was facing himself. And that realization had been far more powerful than any punch thrown that night. He learned that confidence without humility is fragile, that applause fades, that dominance is temporary. But true understanding creates something unshakable. The next time Victor stood in a roaring arena, under blinding lights, hearing thousands chant his name, he closed his eyes for just a second. And in that brief silence within the noise, he found balance. He no longer needed to challenge strangers to prove strength. He no longer feared the quiet ones watching. Because he had learned the lesson that changed everything. The most dangerous person in the room is often the calmest, and the strongest warrior is the one still willing to be a student. Now I want to ask you something. If you had been in that arena that night, would you have recognized true strength before the first strike was thrown? And tell me, from which part of the country are you watching from? Leave a comment.